It's really a tremendous experience to come in over the Atlantic in a plane and look down and see the Statue of Liberty with those noble words and think of Jefferson and Madison and Adams and Washington and all those cats, and then find out that the government is conducting unlicensed searches and seizures inside people's bladders. And the population is standing for that. George Orwell and Franz Kafka should be alive. They should come back and see this. There's nothing in Kafka to compare to it. There really isn't. The great thing about being back in the States is I can't believe the newscasts here. It's like reading surrealist fiction. The president can't remember the last time he conspired to commit a major felony. But he's cool. And Reagan is really cool about it. He says, can you remember what you were doing on August 8th or whatever the date was? And of course, none of us can. But if you put the question another way, can you remember when you committed your last major felony? I think we could all remember that. I remember all the major felonies I've committed way back to 20 years ago. Oral Roberts has announced that God's going to kill him if he doesn't get $4.5 million, which that's such a great routine. Well, I got a pipeline directly to the Kether at the top of the Tree of Life, and I got the word. Oral is actually not going to die. He's going to mutate. He is going to arrive at the next plateau up from oral consciousness, and he's going to change his name to Anal Roberts. I love people like Oral Roberts. It's really fascinating to turn the dial on the television and you get over past channel 40, from 40 up to 60. You keep running into these people who are on there to tell you what God told them to tell you. And I look at them, and it's absolutely a mind-blowing experience to think God sent out such a gang of idiots as that to tell me how I should live my life. They can't even imagine what an hour of my life is like, and they're going to tell me how to run my whole life. I find it incredible. I think if God had something to tell me, he'd have the courtesy to pay a personal call and tell me himself instead of sending those idiots loose on us. But Reagan, to return to the libretto, as it were, Reagan really is a wonderful president in a lot of ways. He's the intelligent person's president, just like Johnson was the pacifist president. By starting the wrong war at the wrong time in the wrong place and fighting it with such vile anti-civilian weapons, he made pacifism more popular than ever. By 1968, 70% of the population opposed the Vietnam War. So I figured Johnson was the pacifist president. He was sent to convert most of the country to pacifism. And then we had Richard Nixon, who was the anarchist's president. After 5 years of Nixon, everybody felt about the government the way only anarchists used to feel about it. And then we got Gerald Ford, who nobody can even remember. I go around conducting these tests as I go around the country, asking people, do you remember Gerald Ford? And they say, who? Gerald Ford, he was the one who looked like the guy in the science fiction movies who's the first one to see the creature. And that's about all anybody can remember about him. And then we had Jimmy Carter, who had the most powerful, magnetic, mystical initials in the Western world. But he had to try to negotiate with the Ayatollah Khomeini, and that gets you nowhere. The Ayatollah Khomeini is a man who has a pipeline to Allah, and Allah tells him to tell everybody what to do, which includes killing all the members of Subud, and Baha'i and other heresies like that. But committing major felonies, as I said, I can remember all the major felonies I've committed, and it's a very interesting exercise. It might be a kind of yoga even, to sit down sometime and figure out how many crimes you've committed in your lifetime and how many years in prison you'd get if they caught you every time. And if you don't think you'd get at least 1,000 years, look up the sex laws in every state you've lived in. You'll find just on your sexual behavior alone, you're good for about 2,000 years in the joint. And then when you consider the funny chemicals you may have fooled around with in your time, And back in the Vietnam War, a lot of us were involved in helping draft resistors escape to Canada. I think it's safe to talk about that now. The statute of limitations has expired. And if you start adding it all together, if you're a normal, decent human being, I think you're subject to about 10,000 years in prison, which is an interesting commentary on government. One of the things that I've never understood is these groups that rate legislators. They put out these sheets rating legislators, and they rate them according to how many bills they enacted, whether they were there to vote on a bill and how many bills they wrote and all. The idea is that the more bills that get through Congress, the better off we all are, which is exactly the reverse of the view of Lao Tzu, who said the more laws we enact, the more criminals we produce. Actually, the more laws we enact, the more we approach the situation of the anthill in T.H. White's Book of Maryland, where they had the slogan, "Everything not forbidden is compulsory." That's why I always say an honest politician is a national calamity. I mean, we can stand the crooks. It's a certain number of people always get their snout in the trough. That's ordinary mammalian politics, and one expects it. But honest politicians keep writing laws. And now that they're testing urine, how much further can they go? We've gotten past the point where everything not forbidden is compulsory. Soon we're going to arrive at the point where everything not compulsory is forbidden. And all this is in defense of the free world. Somebody asked me outside to talk about Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary was sentenced to 37 years in prison for poor usage of the First Amendment. That is, for shooting off his mouth about unpopular subjects. I visited Leary quite a bit while he was in prison, and it was a fascinating experience. He was the freest man in the United States at that time. He absolutely refused to accept prison as a limitation on the freedom of his mind and his spirit. And visiting him in prison was always a profoundly humiliating experience for me, and therefore a very powerful learning experience, because he was much happier than I was. And I thought, how can this guy be so happy when he's locked up in a cage like an animal? But Timothy had learned something from his many years as a psychologist, neurologist, and acid head. And the interesting thing is that when Dr. Leary was put in prison, the major protests against that came from artists, poets, literary people. There was hardly any objection from the scientific community, even though the judge who sentenced Leary waved one of Leary's books in the air and said, "This man's ideas are dangerous." So it was very clear that Leary was getting sentenced for his scientific ideas, and yet the scientific community didn't pay any attention at all. But that's hardly surprising. Tim told me once that it was a turning point in his life when the books of Wilhelm Reich were burned in an incinerator in New York in 1957. I don't know how many people here are old enough to even remember that. It was a turning point in my life, too. It actually happened even before they started testing, testing urine. They seized all the books of Dr. Wilhelm Reich from the Orgone Institute Press, which published them. They took all the books, put them in a garbage truck, drove them to an incinerator, and burned them. Then they went up to Reich's laboratory in Rangeley and smashed all of his scientific instruments with axes. And the total protest from the scientific community at that time amounted to 18 psychiatrists who signed a petition protesting against it. That changed, Tim told me, that changed his whole attitude towards the psychiatric and psychological professions. And I think it changed my attitude. So that's another one of the crimes I've committed in my long and disgraceful life. I was sitting in an orgone box when that was illegal. The government declared that the orgone box was a dangerous consciousness-altering instrument. Actually, they claimed that the orgone box didn't work, so therefore you shouldn't sit in it because something bad might happen to you because it didn't work. The funniest, if you got my kind of a sense of humor, which is kind of surrealist and weird, the funniest thing about the whole Reich case is that just before he went to prison, he announced he was going to use his orgone cloudbuster to make a rainstorm in Maine. And he turned his orgone cloudbuster on the clouds, and rain came. And the total response from the scientific community to that has been to repeat for the last 30 years, it was only a coincidence, it was only a coincidence, it was only a coincidence. And a bolder audience, I don't have to define a mantra. You all know what a mantra is. This is the mantra of what I call fundamentalist materialism, which is what my new book, The New Inquisition, is about. It's about fundamentalist materialism. I know it's more fashionable to attack fundamentalist Christianity right now, but I thought the fundamentalist materialists have been getting away with too much, and somebody should reveal that they're out with no clothes on, like the king in Andersen's tale.